How are you doing? Good day, good morning. I'm glad that you guys are with me. This is Mr. Whitford to continue another lesson in Unit 8 Transformations. Good morning, my 8th graders. We are going to continue to work on transformations, and today we're going to be talking about rotation. Right, we have been talking about so far, we talked about reflection, we talked about translation. Right, when we think about translation, we think about sliding an image across. When we think about reflection, we think about flipping an image, right? Today we're going to be talking about rotation. Now, all three of these particular transformations we're talking about, they have something in common, which they do not adjust the size or the shape of our image, right? All it does is move the image, either sliding it or flipping it or turning it, as we're going to see today, but the size doesn't grow, it doesn't shrink. Every part of it is still congruent, right? The sides are also congruent. The triangle still has the same angle measurements. But I want us to focus on, to use the rules of rotation today. Now, all this stuff may seem like a whole lot that you're learning, but we're going to take time to practice and go over it in more detail. But this is to give you some understanding at the beginning level, okay? So we're going to talk about rotations, and we're going to focus rotations around the origin. As you go on to 10th grade, they'll probably do rotations in different areas and on the coordinate plane. But for today, we're going to talk about around the origin. And we're going to turn images, okay? To start off, let's look at the bell work. Now, I just want you to look at the bell work and try to see if you can figure this out. Examine the image below and determine which quadrant and which direction the image was rotated. So if you look at this image, this is the pre-image, the one that's faded, but the new image is this one that's a little more bold, and you can see the arrow showing where it's going. Can you tell me which quadrant it's in now? Which quadrant did it end up going into? Which quadrant do you believe it was rotated into? And then also tell me which direction do you believe it was rotated? Was it rotated clockwise or was it rotated counterclockwise? So take a minute, pause the video if you need to, and just circle those two answers that you need to put. Is it quadrant 1, 2, 3, or 4? Or is it clockwise or counterclockwise? So take a minute. All right. So when you went to go and look at it, if you were to look at this and say, okay, well, which quadrant did it rotate into? If you remember, this is the y-axis, that's the x-axis, which means that this has to be quadrant 1. That's quadrant 1. And these are Roman numerals that we're using here. So don't be like, oh, that's the letter I. It is the letter I, but it's also in Roman numerals, it's the number 1. This is quadrant 2. Okay, this is quadrant 3 down here. Okay, I'm trying to do it as best as I can. I apologize if it's not connected. Cool. Quadrant 3, and then finally over here is quadrant 4, right? Which is like an I with a V in the middle as well. Okay. All right. So these are our 4 quadrants. If you were to guess and say which one did it go into, you would absolutely be correct if you said quadrant 2. It did go into quadrant 2. Okay. Is it clockwise or counterclockwise? Now this is important, especially for today's lesson, because you need to be able to identify, okay, which direction are we moving, right? Which direction are we moving? So I want you to notate somewhere, if you're writing notes on the side, write clockwise and then write this type of notation here, right? Little arrow this way, then a little arrow this way. How do I know this is clockwise? Well, clockwise is the way that you read a clock, and we know that the ticks of a clock goes like this, right? And I'm hoping that I'm not flipped image for you, but that we are understanding that it goes in this direction like this. That's clockwise rotation. Counterclockwise rotation is going the opposite direction of how a clock moves, right? So it would be this way. Now, because we can see that this has an arrow and the arrow is pointing that way, that means that the rotation is happening like this, which looks a little bit more like the counterclockwise rotation. So for this particular answer, if you were to circle counterclockwise, you would have been absolutely right. But I would want you to write down these arrows next to each of them, okay? This is important for you to recognize which direction we're moving, right? They're moving in different directions, and I need you to recognize, okay, which one looks like counterclockwise, which one looks like clockwise. What are the quadrants that we're looking at, okay? If you need to, take a minute, write those notes down, write down the quadrants on the actual image, write down, circle the 2 answers here. before we go further into looking at the notes, as well as taking the time to practice using the modeling. Okay, I'm going to clear the text. All right, let's move down. So the notes are very important here. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. Will it be easy right off the top of your head? No, it will not. Am I recommending that you memorize these at the 8th grade level? No, I'm not. On your test that you're going to be given, I'm going to give you an image just similar to the one that you see on the right. That way you can understand it. But I want to break down what this image really means, so that way you can understand each part of it, okay? So if you look at the very first thing here, it says, now actually my notes are a little bit backwards from the actual image. I didn't realize that until I'm looking at it now. But let's break it down. There are 3 different types of rotation, right? In terms of the coordinate plane. There are 90-degree rotations, 180-degree rotations, 270-degree rotations. If I said 360 or 0, which is the next one, that'll be the same exact spot, right? So I won't say 360 or 0, because technically if I were to rotate something 360 degrees, it would end up being exactly in the same spot if I didn't touch it at all. So we're not going to talk about 360, because 360 is the same exact spot that you're in. But we're going to talk about 90, 180, and 270. Okay? So a 90-degree rotation, right? There's 2 directions that we can go. We know we can go clockwise or we can go counterclockwise. We can go clockwise 90 or we can go counterclockwise 90. Now, in the same way that I was saying that the 360 is the same as us not moving, that means that 360-degree rotation, which is the same spot, is the same thing as 0-degree rotation. A 90-degree clockwise rotation is the same thing as if I went 270 degrees counterclockwise, right? So you can write here in this blank, you can write 270. Hold on, let me get mine. Right, 270 degrees. Okay, and that is counterclockwise. So I'm just going to use this double CC here. Okay. Give me one more second. I apologize. I'm going to use a double CC, and that just indicates counterclockwise. So we're all on the same page, right? This double CCW means counterclockwise, right? So a 90 degrees clockwise rotation is the same thing as a 270 degrees counterclockwise rotation. Well, how do you know that, Mr. Wilfred? Let me show you guys, actually. Let me take a second to try to give you a little bit more of a demonstration to be able to help you understand what do I mean. Imagine I had 2 lines, right? Beautifully straight lines, right? Let's call these lines x-axis and y-axis, right? The x-axis and the y-axis. Let me just label them for you. This is y, this is x. Okay. Now, if I had an image, let's say I had an image, and let me pick, I don't know, let's pick this square. Okay. And I were to take this rectangle square and I were to rotate it, right? Yeah, why not? This is an example, just so we're aware, okay? And let's imagine it's a square, not really a rectangle. And I were to rotate this, right, 90 degrees clockwise. What does that mean? That means this rotation here. That means a 90-degree clockwise will make this image go down here. That's 90 degrees. Sorry, 90 degrees clockwise, right? Let's do CW. Okay. If I were to go 270 degrees, and let me use a different color here, maybe like a nice blue, 270 degrees will go like this: 90, 180, 270. That would be a 270 degree counterclockwise rotation, right? Because I went the opposite way. I went opposite of clockwise. So this is a counterclockwise rotation. Sorry, should be using my pen. I'm not. Right? But you can see that they would end up in the same spot. So that's why I'm trying to show you that 90 degrees clockwise is the same thing as 270 degrees counterclockwise. And if you look down here at this table, you'll see it says 270 degrees counterclockwise, and then it says clockwise 90, because they're the same exact thing. And the rule is the same. Yes, can you give me 1 minute? Awesome. All right, so the rule would be the same if you're doing 270 degrees counterclockwise or if you're doing 90 degrees clockwise, okay? So let's keep going. Let's look at the next one, right? 180 degrees clockwise rotation, right? That would be the same as what? that would be the same as 180 degrees counterclockwise, right? They're the same. These are the exact same. And if you look on the table here, you'll see 180 degrees counterclockwise, 180 degrees clockwise. They are the same exact rule. And if I go one more, rotation 270 degrees clockwise. So 270 clockwise is the clockwise column. 270 degrees clockwise is the same as 90 degrees counterclockwise. So in this section down here, we're going to write 90 degrees. Sorry, make sure I put these degree markers, right? And that's counterclockwise, okay? Now the notation is exactly what it says over there as well. We have something going from XY, which is our normal point. XY is our normal point that we have, right? When it's going from 90 degrees clockwise to 270 degrees counterclockwise, we see it going, we switch them. Instead of it being X comma Y, it's going to be Y comma X, but the X is going to be negated. Well, what do you mean, Mr. Woodford? Imagine I had a point like this. Let's give you an example here. 2 comma 4. 2 comma 4 would become, sorry, that's an arrow, 4 comma negative 2. Did you see what I did there? Did you see how we switched the X and Y, made it Y and then X, but then when we negated the X, instead of a positive 2, we made a negative 2, okay? 180 degrees clockwise, right? And the clockwise, counterclockwise are the same exact rule. But the rule says this. It goes XY goes to what? Negative X, comma negative Y. So do we flip them? Do we change them and flip it and make it YX instead? No, we just negate both of them. But let's do another example. Imagine I had a point like 2 comma 4. What is this under 180 degrees clockwise or counterclockwise rotation? That will be a negative 2 comma negative 4. And finally, the last rule here that we need to look at and use, and keep in mind, all these notes you're going to use on your homework and your independent practice because they're going to be needed. And I'm not asking you to memorize them. Even on your quiz and your test that you're going to get, you're going to need to look back at the notes or look back at this to be able to remember how to do this, okay? 270 degrees clockwise was the same thing as 90 degrees counterclockwise. We see XY goes to or becomes, right? It becomes, they switch again. However, this time the X is, the Y is negated, X stays the same. So let's get another point again. Let's do 2 comma 4. I'm doing 2 comma 4 to show you that each one of these points are different. 4 comma negative 2 is not the same thing as negative 2 comma negative 4, and neither is negative 4 comma 2, right? These are all 3 different points. They're not the same, right? So each rotation will end up in a different spot, and they all demand that you use a different rule to get you there, okay? So this is exactly the notation and the rules. Take a second, pause the video if you need to, copy down the notes, and that way, if you need to reflect on, need to look at it again, do so, right? Take a second to really internalize it. If we was in class, I would even challenge you to, take another practice if you want. Take another point and try to do a 90 degrees clockwise rotation with another point. Do 180 degrees clockwise with another point and 270 degree clockwise with another point, right? That way, that may help you. And honestly, I think that would be a great, let's do that. Let's take a second to do that. That'll be a good thing to do. Let's take another point. Let's take I'm going to give you a point for each one of these. Let's take a point like, and actually, let me just move the rule up. So that way the rule is not in the way here. Let me take this. Take this. No, it's not all together, so I won't be able to move it. That's okay. I won't be able to move it, and I don't want to ruin it. Let's take another point. Let's take a point like negative 1 comma 3. What would this become when you do a 90 degrees clockwise? Same thing down here, negative 1 comma 3. What would this point become if you did 180 degrees clockwise rotation? And finally, negative 1 comma 3. What would this become if you did a 270 degree clockwise rotation? Okay, so take a second to do that. Pause the video and see if you can figure out what those 3 points are, as well as copying down the notes. All right. All right, excellent. I hope everyone had a chance to pause it and be able to copy down notes as well as answer these three things. So what you should get when you rotate -1, 3 with the 90 degrees clockwise or 270 degrees counterclockwise, what you should end up getting is 3, 1. It should be 3, 1. Once again, switch the X and Y, and then make sure you negate the X, okay? When I do a 180 degrees, and this one should be pretty simple, all we're doing is negating them both, right? So this will be a +1 and then a -3. And finally, down here, we switch the Y and the X, but we negate the Y this time. So we end up with -3, -1. All right? So these are what you should have got if you practice and use that. I'm going to clear the text now. And what we're going to do is continue to go because I want to show you how to rotate an image under these rules, okay? Now, I'm not going to do all three here, but I am going to do 2 of them, and you will have time to practice and look back, okay? And I'm clearing the text. Excellent. All right. So let's go to the next page. Too many pages. All right. So, and the key word, right, and I believe that's in the reflection as well as the time to answer that the central question, is the key word here is turning. We are turning. The image is not changing, but we're turning the image whether it's clockwise or counterclockwise, all right? So let's look here. So we see we have triangle LUX, and I actually made sure I wrote down all 3 of my points beforehand. Now on yours, what you'll have to do is you'll have to find those points on this triangle, okay? Or on the quadrilateral that you're given, right? You're gonna need to rotate. Now my first rotation that they're telling me to do is 180-degree rotation, okay? Now notice it doesn't say clockwise or counterclockwise because we know rotating 180 degrees, whether clockwise or counterclockwise, they're the same exact thing. They're the same exact rule. They don't change anything. Right, so we're going to rotate 180 degrees, and we're doing it around the origin, which is the center point 0, 0, right? And every single one of these are around the origin. And we're going to make sure we create L prime, U prime, and X prime with this rotation. So remember the rule for 180 degrees, right? And you can look back on the page before to get it, right? The rule said we're going to take it from XY, and I'm going to write it down here. We're going to go from XY to -X, -Y. So all we're doing is negating them. So if I were to write the coordinates before I were to actually graph it, I would have something that looks like this. And I want to make sure I write this in a nice color here. So that way when I go to graph it, it's also in that color. Okay, I would go, okay, well, L prime is going to be 3, -1. U prime is going to be 3, -5. Well, how do I know this? Negate the X, +3. Negate the Y, -1. Same thing for this one. Negate the X, +3. Negate the Y, -5. And finally for X, 0, 5, we can't negate 0, so 0 is just 0. Okay? But we can negate the 5. So we get this. So these are my new 3 points. And I would go and graph them to see what this 180-degree rotation is. Now remember, this is in quadrant 2. 180 degrees, 90, 180 should end up in quadrant 4. If your image is not in quadrant 4, you didn't rotate it properly 180 degrees. But let's make sure our coordinates are exactly where they should be, okay? So we got 3, -1 right here, right? And we're going to label that L prime. We got 3, -5, and we're going to label that U prime. And we got X, which is 0, -5, which this is X prime right here. If you look at it, you'll be able to see with me without a doubt, this is in quadrant 4. You can connect all your beautiful points, make them nice and straight. Okay, and you'll end up with this triangle, and you'll see that it is a 180-degree rotation, right? And essentially, if it's in quadrant 2, I want you to know something, a 90-degree rotation, and this is, I'm doing it counterclockwise. 90 degree is right here. It would be in quadrant 3, and then 180 degrees would be in quadrant 4, right? If I went clockwise, it'll end up in quadrant 190, and then once again 180 in quadrant 4, right? So this is a nice way to be able to look at it, understanding where your quadrants are. Let me do one more rotation with you of the same exact triangle. And then what we'll do is I'll let you practice on your own. Please watch the video. If you have to rewatch it again, please do so. Okay? I'm going to clear the text just because I need the space. Okay? I need the space here. Okay? And click. All right. So let's move up. I'm going to move up right here. Okay? And if you want, I will draw the actual other triangle that we just did a little while ago. That way we're all still seeing it together to notice that they're not the same. Okay. All right. So that's the other triangle that we just drew. But now I'm on to the second part to rotate it around the origin 9 degrees counterclockwise. Now this is important, right? I would recommend you go back in your notes to recognize, okay, well, when I do counter 9 degrees counterclockwise, what is that? And if you need to, just go right back and click on the actual black arrow, look at what we actually put, and say, okay, 90 degrees counterclockwise, negative y comma x. That way you'll be able to have it. Everything is here for you. I'm not trying to trick you, right? Everything is there for you. So that way when you go to do it yourself, you'll be able to see it exactly as it should be. Okay, let me try to line it up. All right, so the rule says we go from xy, right? We go from xy to negative y comma x. Okay. So this means that every one of my points, I'm going to negate the y. I'm going to switch the x and y first, and then I'm going to negate the y. So for L, it says -1. Up here, it says -1 comma 3. -1 comma 3 means it's going to be 1 first, which is the y, but I'm going to negate it. Or I'm going to negate it, and then we're going to have -3. Same thing with u prime. U prime, we're going to switch them, negate the y, -5 comma -3. And then finally for x double prime, these are double primes, I apologize, negate the y, switch them, right? 5, 0, negate the y, -5, 0. Okay, now we went 90 degrees counterclockwise. What does that look like, right? That means we're taking this triangle and we're actually going counterclockwise on this triangle, 9 degrees, which looks like this. It's one rotation this way. So it should end up over here. If your triangle is not over here, we may have done something wrong, okay? So we rotate it that way. So let me go and put these points in, right? Let me use a different color, like let's use blue, because that's what I was trying to use originally. -1, -3, it's right here, right? This is my L double prime. Then I have -5, -3 right here. This is my U double prime. Then I have -5, 0, which is right here. And that is my X double prime, okay? Notice the triangle has been turned. It's not facing the same way. It's turned now, which is the key word when we talk about rotation. We're turning the image. So make sure your image is turned, and if it is going 90 degrees counterclockwise, it needs to end up in the third quadrant. So this is what it would look like if I was rotating it. And honestly, if we was in class, I would honestly have you turn your paper 90 degrees and you will see it should look like that, right? So this is what we're doing. Make sure each one, you're gonna pay attention to what it's telling you, okay? Each one has different directions. This says origin 180. This one says around origin 90 degrees counterclockwise. Read the directions fully that they're telling you, so that way you could do it. Don't just assume, okay, it's this way. They're not the same as what we just did. There are 3 different ways of doing it. The only one I didn't do here was 90 degrees clockwise. So, I'm sorry, yeah. Okay, so please take your time to look over this, look over the notes. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I will gladly answer them. If you need to rewatch the video, please do so. Thank you so much for joining me. Until next time, bye-bye.